Welcome everyone to In Your Best Interest, an ALM First podcast, a show that will explore common depository challenges, give you an insider's view of the latest market trends, and share stories and insights from industry leaders. I'm your host, Mike Ensweiler. As top-level executives in financial institutions come to grips with the possibility of enduring high interest rates while thinking through this new post-pandemic business environment, there's a noticeable urgency to appoint leaders who can excel in this unpredictable climate. CEOs are grappling with the need to enact significant and occasionally expensive changes within their organizations, even if they are unpopular in the immediate future. This frantic search for adaptability highlights the significant changes occurring in the leadership landscape of the finance sector. To talk this through, I'm excited to be joined today by Mark Meyer, President and CEO at Filene Research Institute. Mark is a prominent figure in cooperative finance in North America, adept at translating complex research questions into actionable insights and innovative products. As CEO at Filene, he guides a talented team focused on research and innovation to showcase the potential of cooperative finance and community transformation. Mark's expertise extends internationally with extensive publications and lectures across multiple continents, including advising the U.S. Department of the Treasury and speaking at esteemed academic institutions like Harvard Business School. Thanks for joining us, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Mike, it is the bomb diggity to be here with you today.
Awesome. Well, I always appreciate spending time with you because I learned so much, and we don't have a lot of time today, so let's dig right in. Mark, as you well know, today's economic landscape is reminiscent of the high inflation, high interest rate era of almost 4 decades ago. Many of today's financial leaders find themselves navigating in unfamiliar territory. A lot of today's execs were raised in an era of abundant liquidity and easy access to capital, and therefore lack firsthand experience in managing a financial institution amidst the challenges of the present conditions. I guess I say all that to lead to this question of, from your seat in the stadium, what do you believe are the primary challenges leaders face today in terms of fostering growth and stability within their organizations?
Well, I think as we find ourselves in this strange era of, trying to lead when we're trying to be everywhere, all at once. It's somewhat reminiscent of the movie that won the Oscars back in 2023. And, we are facing a multiverse of opportunities, a multiverse of challenges. And, when a leader in this era is looking forward, there's 3 somewhat headwinds that are challenging us. Number one is we just have, as you identified, what I call the skid mark of the fiscal policy from the pandemic of 2020. And it just has taken, several years for this pig in the python to work its way through. And all of us enjoyed a 2.25% 15-year mortgage interest rate. We knew it wouldn't last forever. And that has led to interest rate risk and ultimately some investment decisions that were made in 21 by many credit unions, liquidity pressures as well. So, just this kind of working through that skid mark is taking time. I think we're getting closer to the end of it. However, item number 2 on top of this challenge is how consumers changed how they want to do business with financial institutions. And this has really led to, I say we're getting Netflixed and we've got to redo our tech stack. And we also have to think about who we're partnering with and how we're partnering with other organizations to deliver our members' needs. The final issue is, this ill-timed, maybe it's well-intentioned regulatory considerations that are, pushing on credit unions right now. CECL, the notion of overdraft protection restrictions, as well as interchange income are all, attacking the business model of credit unions simultaneous to these other two issues. So, when you ask the question, what's a leader to do? I think when you're in a moment of crisis or a moment of challenge, I say follow data first. Following data first is a very important attribute of a leader. Number 2, making sure as you're looking at all of these opportunities, air quotes opportunities, focus on your zone of control and your zone of influence on how to make changes. And then the final piece is make sure you're standing on your organizational values as well as your personal values. I think that formula sets you up for great success. Now, what's a little different today, Mike, than years previous in kind of this moment of being everywhere all at once is having adaptability and building adaptability muscle. And I think that's a little bit different in how leaders need to think about leadership in this current era. And McKinsey recently, focused on what are the kind of components that leaders can exercise to build adaptability muscle. And one of them is focusing on your own personal well-being as a foundational skill. If you're not bringing your best self to work every day as a leader, you're not going to be making the best decisions, and you're going to struggle to keep alignment with your team. The other aspect in that adaptability muscle is really making purpose your North Star and defining up front what you're not willing to negotiate on when you're being pulled in so many different directions. I think the third is this notion of really looking at the world as though it's a changing place. At Filene, I call it that we have to do Filene yoga all the time. You have to be swift, you have to be nimble, you have to be snimble. And so having that adaptability lens is so critical. One of the most important aspects to get through moments like this is making sure you've got deep and diverse connections and a wonderful network. I think that is, no one can go it alone in this world. And we're so lucky that we work in a networked system where it's collaboration and cooperation are values of the organizations we lead. The final one's a hard one for leaders because we always want to be perfect, but recognizing you have to make it a safe space to learn. And one of the most critical functions of innovation in this era is testing, learning, and iterating. So, in some, Mike, you ask a very simple question. It's somewhat of a complicated answer. Data first, the notion of zone of control and influence, and sticking with your values, but also all these attributes of building that wonderful adaptability muscle.
This is great. Wow, there's a lot to unpack and to dig into there. So, as we think about some of these things, in this rapidly changing environment, what skills are becoming increasingly essential for leaders to possess? You talked about broadening your network and deepening those relationships, but are there other skills that you see that may be missing or that people need to maybe hone in on a little bit more?
So we're all a work in progress as leaders in this environment, but in the last decade, hierarchy's dead, right? You no longer aspire to get to the fifth floor to sit next to Mike Ensweiler, right? That's not the format we're in. We are now digitized and we're networked as leaders. So how we show up as leaders, we're presented in a network of our team. When we show up on a Zoom call, there's not any hierarchy. We're all in the Zoom call together if you have an all hands. And so recognizing the difference and the subtleties in the skills required to lead in a networked way versus a hierarchy way. It's very easy to, think of what it was like 10 years ago to ride in the elevator up to the fifth floor, to get off the office, to see the C-suite, and there's an execu potty in the C-suite. All that doesn't matter anymore. We've seen one another with baseball caps on. We're showing up differently, and recognizing that network a piece to leadership. I think there are a couple of this is very organic, Mike, but a couple of things that we've all had to figure out over the last 4 years is one is empathy.
Yeah.
One is empathy, and really recognizing all of us are handling what's being thrown at us in a day-to-day world that's different, that went sideways and continues to just spiral out in a different direction than what we maybe any of us anticipated, is leading with empathy and understanding. That goes without saying in this era. Transparency is king. And everything is shared. Everything that you say, this podcast is being recorded, and once it's recorded, it's out there for the universe to see and digest and and ensue. So transparency and sharing, what's happening, not leaving people, to second guess, especially when we don't have the accidental collisions as much in person, or we don't have time for the small conversations that we had in years gone by. That notion of transparency. And the third is somewhat related to all of this, and it's one I was recently asked by an emerging leader at an organization, younger in their career, and they said, Meyer, you've been at this for a couple of decades. What have you learned is one of the most important aspects of leadership. And I said, it snapped. It came out of my mouth before I could even retract it. Effective communication.
Do you find,
are you listening? Right. It's like, are you listening? Are you processing effective communication, and how often it takes to get the message across? I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I interrupted you. So my apology there, Mike, because I really like where you're going with that, because I see that more and more right now is that communication piece, especially in this kind of post-COVID era where you had people working from home, and now you maybe have hybrids, or some shops they really don't go back at all, maybe other than, some folks to staff the branches. How do you build culture? How do you foster that communication, especially in this digital era where it's easy to hide behind, text messages or Teams messages or emails versus picking up the phone, walking into that office, having that coffee, kind of conversation, that coffee talk. That's a missing element. Those impromptu meetings were just so critical to me in establishing a good collaborative environment where we're all rowing in the same direction. So, as whether you're an aspiring leader or you've been leading a long time, certainly a lot of disruption and change just in that piece of the business. And love to get your thoughts and takes on that.
Well, I think the rules are being written. The rules are being written right now. And, the learning is being digested right now. And Filene is researching this through two different opportunities. We have a center of excellence we launched last year on leadership strategy and governance. We have a second one on the credit union of the future. The leadership aspect of what you've just identified, sits in both what does it take to lead the credit union of the future, build culture, all these good things. What does it take, for leaders, for even boards in this era? Yesterday, we had the opportunity to gather 50 credit union executives here in Orange County, California, at Schools First Credit Union, and they were all a local core of a varying degree of executives at credit unions. It was very interesting when we talked about this and how we even work. About a third completely remote, about a third completely in person, about a third hybrid-ish, right?
Yeah.
So all the culture, what pulses through culture for that continuum of, and by the way, all of that could be working at the same credit union. Some are coming in every day, some are hybrid. So how this is, the norms for this are all being written right now. And I would go back to that last competency we talked about momentarily, just a moment ago, on making it safe to learn, testing. We have found in our smaller organization of 30 some associates, more intentional conversations about where we are in our progress to plan is important. Ideally, we'd love to go quarterly. Because we're a small organization, we have to go at least twice a year. Less than twice a year is not enough. We have taken the House of Ed. We had a beautiful facility in Madison, Wisconsin, and had 30 of our 36 employees there. Now less than 10 live in Madison, and the rest of us all have moved and scattered across the country. So the House of Ed is now in the cloud. Things that we're doing is, we do in-person all hands, not less than twice a year. We'd love to go quarterly. Again, resources, and it takes money to do that. Finding those inflection points, attaching some of our own internal gatherings with the external market gatherings to create those moments of connection. Your travel budget's a little higher when you go remote, I find, but I think it's a rapid experiment, and I think you have to be more intentional. Would be one thing. I think you have to be creative. You have to test. I'm watching with a lot of curiosity. My oldest adult child works in the tech industry, and their firm is about a firm of 600, and they seem to have found a way to make. I'm watching my adult daughter be very engaged and very supportive, and she has a culture, yet she's only met people on her team 3 times in 3 years.
Wow, that's crazy. One of the items you touched on was kind of that transparency and trust. And as you mentioned, those are crucial in today's environment in the banking sector in general. Can we dig in a little bit more on the importance of ethical leadership in maintaining these values, and perhaps share an example of a time when ethical considerations influenced a significant decision within your organization?
Well, I think, we've identified that. I think one of the most important is transparency. And I think, the rise of communication channels when they identify an organization that has breached, core ethical considerations or values, what ensues is, the right thing. A light is shined upon it right away. The big thing that I have learned in when you run into something that has a possibly, and I'm a lawyer by training, when you encounter an issue that involves, an ethical or a conflict of interest opportunity, is the whole notion of disclosure. Disclosure first. Like, you really, if there's a question, you disclose it, and then you don't try to guide it. If you're a leader, you back away and you turn it over to a third party to review and, analyze and share results, and you live with those results. It's back to the Nixon story, right? Was the cover up worse than the offense?
Right.
And so the notion of what I've observed in the industry and in others is, we all are going to trip and fall. It's how quickly you identify and admonish yourself. Hey, I tripped. And shine a light on it. What have I learned? And then if there is a possible breach that, needs to be examined, you turn over to the third party and let them guide you through that. And in human nature, as folks are like, I don't want anyone to know I made a mistake. This goes back to that comment, make it safe to learn. Leaders go first. When we trip, we identify, we share, we examine. And I've had a couple of situations. I had one of my favorite, I love boots, right? I love boots. I did a planning session for a credit union, and they gave me a pair of, if you know the type of boots the Indiana Jones wore back in all the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was Alden boots, and I got myself a pair of Alden boots as a gift, a thank you gift. But right away, I knew in my gut those boots were of significant value, and I needed to disclose. And yes, I had to either pay for the boots or send them back. And what do you think I did? I paid for the boots. I bought those boots.
Heck yeah.
So the other examples are, you make if you're a CEO and you've made a mistake, how quickly, once you've made that mistake, you share that with your board of directors and you turn it over to the third party, whether it's your chief risk officer or your CFO, whoever, to guide through that and lead the board through that and let the board review. And if they have to bring even a more independent, that's those are the right things. Those are the check and balances we have, especially in financial services. I want to pause and pivot from the ethical piece of the conversation and pivot to trust and the institutional trust and the things that I see happening right now for credit unions that, I am concerned about. And, in the media, there have been some stories about credit union practices, whether it's been lending, whether it's been ODP, that are being floated into mainstream media and consumer reports. And, first seek to understand what's the data behind that, like what's really happening. And it's hard to do in a frenzied medium, but seek to understand what's really happening here underneath, these stories. And the other piece to this, so you have some behavior that has to be examined. Let's understand what's really happening in these situations. And credit unions have always been for the consumer and always for the hardworking person. And yet we have to really examine some of our products and programs and services to say, are they there, even if it means our business model has become interdependent upon it? And I think there's a lot of soul searching that needs to be done right now. And I heard a credit union CEO say yesterday, I'm always felt the credit union was the best deal for my members. But now with the evolution of innovation and fintechs and my very low passbook savings account rate versus what they can get online, how do I tell them the credit union is the best deal in town for them? And then simultaneously, we have some of our colleagues who are offering, because of the pressures of liquidity, they're offering new money only high rate certificates. And that's just one of those reflections when you say, I understand the business need. And when we talk about trust and how trust has been the pillar of the credit union space, some of our well-intended but unintentional behavior starting to pick away at that. The final element is trust today for the emerging consumer for the emerging member, for Gen Z, for Gen Y, might have different characteristics that are valued in trust than what the previous generation had. So it might be not the lowest rate anymore. It might be speed, access, and convenience, and how quickly can you get me my money? What payment platform are you integrated with? So where you see credit unions losing ground on trust in terms of operations, I think is our overall as an industry is we are, a little late to market on some of our tech solutions for our members. And I know that that's because they cost money.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the consumer doesn't care. So
Right. And so that's a good theme. And I know we're getting close to the end here, so we probably have time for another question or two. But let's talk a little bit. You mentioned innovation a couple of times, and that's in a lot of industries, that's a key driver of success. So as you think about the credit union of the future, what strategies do you believe effective leaders can employ to foster a culture of innovation within their teams while also managing that risk effectively?
So I think, the competency, if you look at the evolution of how we talk about innovation in the industry, and I even look at our own journey over the last 2 decades at Filene and what we've been doing with innovation. So often individuals think that it's creativity. So let's create an innovation room, put whiteboards and fun chairs to sit in and, pull people together. And,
Yep.
creativity it's actually a fun part of innovation, and it's a hard part of innovation if done without some sort of parameters and discipline. And so really studying what does it take to innovate as a whole, from ideation at the beginning and understanding and the research for member needs, that's a lot harder than just creativity and locking yourself in a room and bouncing ideas and throwing stuff up against the wall. Understanding your member, understanding pain points, understanding life events, all that research really precipitates, the creativity. What frameworks are you using for ideation to make sure you're inclusive in your ideation and creativity? And that's, where I think we have a much broader knowledge than we did even a decade plus ago of how critical diversity is for breakthrough ideas in innovation, people from different backgrounds, perspectives, insights, and you create an innovative environment that makes it, I'm not talking about the anonymous inbox, either, that you genuinely endure and bring people that are invited from all aspects of your membership to help innovate. The third critical piece, I think, that is where I would spend the most time, is where Filene has doubled down on the last 3 years. And, we all go to the gym, and, I can think of 2 things I hate more than, well, 3 things I probably hate more than anything. And they all have to do with, when you work out. I hate working out with my core. I hate a plank, I hate a wall squat, and I hate a burpee, right? And those all involve your core. So let's talk about how the core muscles of innovation really are around incubation. And I think that's where we need to double down. I think that final point would be this notion on innovation when you're building a culture is really, what practices do you have in place in your innovation methodology to test for the viability, the desirability, the feasibility of an innovation, and where those overlap to create scalability, where they are actually going to contribute to a return on investment, to be a true innovation, to have a breakthrough in the credit union business model. And what needs to happen to create that environment is back to making it safe to learn, back to this notion of iterating, crawl, walk, run. So you test. The engineers know this. If you've worked in innovation with building a car, what do you do in your incubation process? You test, you learn, and you iterate. You test, you learn, and you iterate, and then you scale and take it to production. And I think that muscle, that core muscle in the innovation process of incubation, to find that desirability, that feasibility, that viability, that equals scalability, is what's missing in most organizations. And, if I were to spend my time, energy, effort, April Klobus at Michigan State University gets it. She's got the lab at Michigan State. That's where Filene came up with the concept to do the lab at Filene. So it's this notion of creating these safe ecosystems and environments to test. Back to the other comment, and get that diverse network going, man.
Yep. And I'm sure you've seen, I'm sure. What have you seen especially since the pandemic, in terms of more diversity and inclusion in thought, in people, in contribution to making their organizations better?
Well, I would think number one, I would go back to the earlier comment on the leaders who've recognized we're moving through a networked form of leadership. Just that recognition, there's not hierarchy anymore, but we're networked across our organizations. I think that right there, has taken hold in many organizations. Where that's taken hold, you're starting to see naturally more diversity and inclusion. I think you're seeing some credit unions attack this with focus, this opportunity with focus, and I think others are, continue to resist. What I say is you can never fight a demographic. And when you see what's happening around us in our society, in our country, you can't fight demographic shift and change. And so this is what is happening, and it's uncomfortable for some, and others who get it are going to, be well ahead of the game, and frankly, will probably win because the demographic shift in our country is real, and you cannot put that in a bottle. It's not going back. And so the sooner people deal with the fact that we are where we are and where we're going, I think they'll be able to calibrate. The most important aspect of all this, when I really think of what you're asking, is just how we as a society, how we as organizations, how we in our communities need to find more space for inclusion and less division. It's a very rough time in our communities, in our country. There's a lot of divisiveness, and this is common as you go through the type of transformation and change that we're seeing in our society.
Yeah. Well, and again, being the optimist, my hope that these challenges we're facing ultimately lead us to a better place. I can sit here and talk with you all day. This is so much fun, and I really do appreciate you, Mark. But we are butting up against the clock. So, what closing thoughts do you have for us?
I think confidence is contagious. That's what Mike Shank, the chief economist from America's credit unions. He says that every now and then when we get down. And remembering, you don't want to be blowing sunshine, rainbows, unicorns when we are in a time of difficulty. But confidence is contagious. And I go back to those principles I started with about how I got through the financial crisis. Baseline is that zone of control, zone of influence, your own personal values. But you layer on what we've learned with that taking care of yourself, building your diverse, connections, making failure and a safe place to learn. These are, I think, the things that we should be focused on as we navigate this, everything, everywhere, all at once kind of world we live in now.
This is great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
Yep. Enjoyed it, Mike. Thank you.
At the end of each episode, I like to take a moment and let you know more about the resources we have available. We have a robust workshop, conference, and webinar schedule, so be sure to visit our website for more details on these, as well as our Education Hub and Resource Center for recorded webinars, articles, and more. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for listening to In Your Best Interest, an ALM First podcast.
The content in this podcast is provided for informational purposes and should not be relied upon as recommendations or financial planning advice. We encourage you to seek personalized advice from qualified professionals regarding all investment decisions. Current and future holdings are subject to risk, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. Podcasts should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced, in whole or in part. Information presented herein is for discussion and illustrative purposes only, and is not a recommendation or an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The views and opinions expressed by the ALM First Financial Advisors speakers are their own as of the date of the recording. Any such views are subject to change at any time based upon market or other conditions, and ALM First Financial Advisors disclaims any responsibility to update such views. These views should not be relied on as investment advice, and because investment decisions are based on numerous factors, may not be relied on as an indication of trading intent on behalf of any ALM First Financial Advisors product. Neither ALM First Financial Advisors nor the speaker can be held responsible for any direct or incidental loss incurred by applying any of the information offered. ALM First Financial Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor with a fiduciary duty that requires it to act in the best interests of clients and to place the interests of clients before its own. However, registration as an investment advisor does not imply any level of skill or training.